Teaching, academia and research papers are hardly the usual backdrop for a computer game, but it's the backdrop for what was one of the most fascinating and thought-provoking and endings that I've had in a game in 2022. The game's called South of the Circle. I picked it up on release for PlayStation 4 and 5 as a cross-buy and thoroughly enjoyed it and spent over the course of a night into morning playing it. It's about 3.5 hours in length, and I was utterly captivated by the story that it tells. You play a character called Peter, who's a Cambridge academic, who gets asked, because he's a Cambridge University teacher, or professor, I should say, he gets asked by the UK government to go and do some investigative research paperwork in Antarctica. Now, this is all taking part during the Cold War era of history, and him and one of his professors goes on a plane, and the plane has a problem and crash lands in the Antarctic. Peter's fine, your friend is not and is seriously injured. And so what you need to do is to go wandering out into the Antarctic, white out, in search of help, support, first aid, survival. What the game then does is it runs kind of two timelines in parallel, and you'll flip between them both. In the current era of the game, in the Cold War Antarctica, you're busy wandering around various different either landscapes or bases trying to find out what has gone on south of the circle, because everywhere you go seems to be abandoned and empty, and you're trying to piece together what on earth has happened to all of these different people in bases, and why there's like paper strewn everywhere, there's dinners kind of just left out in the open that have gone a bit wrong. It's all a bit creepy and unnerving, although that doesn't necessarily come across in the art style, the colour palettes, and the beautiful way how it feels like a rotoscoped, motion captured replay of like real people doing real moves, but then transposed into this kind of low poly environment. The graphics really have a very specific style that I really, really love. Anyway, that's what Peter's doing in the real world at the moment, but what you'll be doing is going back through his past to various key moments that led you towards this decision to take this mission to go to Antarctica. And this is where you will find a fellow research academic called Clara and start a relationship with Clara over the course of the game. And so what you'll be doing is fighting for survival, but also fighting for your love for Clara, and the awkwardness about this period of time where having a woman on a research paper working alongside you was not the done thing. But also Cambridge was like a boys' club, and so it's jobs for the boys and everyone else can go and sod themselves. There's also the general everyone's a little bit chaotic and paranoid because you've got the backdrop of the Cold War going on. So you can't come out with research papers that say X, Y and Z, because then you'll be worried about international treaties and things like that. There's an awful lot of kind of nuanced layers that are going on through Peter's past that leads you towards going on this exposition to Antarctica on behalf of the UK government. And so what you're doing is making choices to build up your relationship with Clara, to then go on your mission and kind of cling to those in the present day as thoughts, feelings and ideas that kind of remind you of home and keep him centred, because where he's got like hypothermia, frostbite, he's getting delusional because of the isolation of Antarctica. He's clinging to all of these things that he and Clara had built up over their relationship to keep him grounded and centred, because no one else is with him and he's going a bit insane. What sells this whole concept is the voice acting. This is by far one of the best voice acting that I've seen in a game ever, period. It is so well put together, so well acted, crafted. The conversations feel fluid, but also in a slightly dreamy quality to it sometimes. But they're also kind of grounded in conversations where like if there's a slight disconnect and there's an undertone, you can feel it through the voice acting. It's not being spelt out to you, but you can kind of go, I feel slightly uneasy here. Or if there's a rift developing between you and Clara, or a closeness, depending on which scenes you're in, you can feel that through the voice acting and the beautiful graphics that kind of play out. It feels like an artistic animation for adults in the way how it feels, again, rotoscopic, low poly, green screened. It's really odd. I love the way how all of the art comes together. The music works really well too and feels very of its time as well as cinematic. But it's the voice acting that truly like floors the entire thing, and the way how it's acted, I think, is just superb. Hello. Now, all of this culminates into a very controversial, or divisive, I would probably say, final act. It took me a while to kind of ponder on my thoughts on it, but it makes its point very, very clear by being not very clear. And I think that was the whole point. And actually, I've seen lots of people write up about how this game has made them feel and come to very different conclusions. So I'm going to leave my review there and just say this is a fantastic experience for anyone that likes narrative-driven games that you watch and kind of move around like a walking simulator more than there actually being puzzles or anything like that, because there is no real interactivity here. It's all about the story. Then after the score, I'll kind of let you know what I think of the ending, because the ending is truly divisive. So stop right now if you've not played it. Go away. Come back later.
I know another way around.
Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching. Okay. Anyone still here that doesn't want to hear about the ending? Go now or forever hold your peace. It's not my fault if you stick around. Naughty people. Okay, we're diving in. So for what it's worth, I think Peter and the three of you on the helicopter die at the end. This is because there's a big white flash and you're that close to an atomic bomb. I don't really see much in the way of anything surviving being that close. So that's kind of part one, whoopsie daisy, night night Peter. The second thing, though, is around this conversation with Clara that takes place at the end, and that's where most of the rage seems to be focused at, or the confusion around it online. And I have to say, when I first felt it back, I thought, what's going on? And it wasn't until I'd read some other online discussions that it kind of brought in perspectives for me that I hadn't really thought of at the time, but is kind of breadcrumbed towards over the course of the story. Peter may have some mental illness or mental health problems, and it's hinted at a few times as he's going around the Antarctic, and where he's drifting in and out of consciousness, and sometimes he thinks Clara's there, sometimes he's not. Now, I always thought that this was kind of like the whiteout and the fear of being all on your own in Antarctica, but actually it could be remnants of his mental health coming back to haunt him. But there's also the other kind of thing in that whenever you look back in your past, it's really difficult to keep this perspective of if you was the bad guy in a relationship and you was the arsehole, would you remember it that way several years later or a different time period later? Especially if that's what you're clinging to as like a survival mechanism. Wouldn't you start to reconstruct your own thoughts? And you would do this over time anyway, where actually you're the protagonist, you're the good guy, and that other person is the enemy. They're the person that doesn't make the tea in the same way. They're the person who you didn't want to do X, Y, and Z. They're the person that brings up the arguments. rather than it being you that's equally as the catalyst or sometimes maybe the antagonist over time. And I think that's what the game is trying to show, is that actually you might, through your own memories, they start to trick you into a way how you then see a different version of events compared to what actually happened. And essentially, Peter's a douchebag, potentially, in this scenario. And so that is why his relationship with Clara fell apart. The other thing that's really interesting is that he could only ever go to Antarctica if he took Clara's name off the research paper. So by definition, you had to have chosen that for it to happen. So even if you want to do the right things and include her on the paper, which is what I did, I included her on, I was as attentive as I could be, in order for you to have got to the start of this story and where it all picks up, you had to have done all the bad things. So it's really interesting that that scene sits and goes, no, you can't be the good guy. In order for you to go to Antarctica, you had to treat me like shit. You had to do this. You had to take my name off the paper. You had to sell Clara out and stick with the big boy club and take the shoveling shit job from the government because you were looking after yourself and your own promotion. At least that's how Clara will see it anyway. And so it's really clever the way how it sets it up and then goes, nah, and pulls the rug out from under you for what is a pretty miserable ending to the game. But it certainly evoked emotion, made me think. And I think if anyone else is kind of wrestling with that whole choice is an illusion type thing, it was all laid out in front of you beforehand, but we didn't really want to see it. I think we was always hoping for, there's got to be a nice way how things worked. And obviously this is Cold War world at the time. We was in a different place. Good things didn't necessarily happen, just like how we hoped they would. So that's my thoughts on the ending. Hope that was interesting. If you've got any comments or something like that, please do drop them down below in the comments, but please do notify them as spoilers so that people can read the review and not get the stuff spoiled down at the bottom. Cheers.